What's going on, guys? Welcome back to Classic Octane. I am Taylor. So today we are making an updated version of a video I made like 8 years ago, and that is how to synchronize your motorcycle carburetors. To start us off, I'm just going to take a minute or two to go over what carb syncing even is, when and why you want to do it. So I'm going to utilize this spare set of CB550 carburetors I have because I think it'll be a little easier to visualize what I'm going to be doing on the bench, and they're almost identical to the CB500 carbs we're actually going to be tuning today. So what carb syncing is the act of making sure that each one of these individual carburetors, as well as each individual cylinder, all live in harmony together. We want to make sure that they're adjusted so that, say, the number 4 carburetor isn't opening way sooner than the rest, causing that cylinder to pull in more air and fuel, causing the engine to kind of fight itself. That one cylinder is kind of getting a jump start ahead of the rest. So when you want to do this process is the very last step of tuning. So before this, you should already have your mixtures dialed in, your ignition timing dialed, all of that stuff should be done. You should have a pretty decent running bike. This is just kind of the cherry on top to make sure that it idles really smooth and that initial kind of on throttle, you don't get any kind of weird blips or hiccups or anything like that. You want to make sure the bike is warm, but not too hot, because the bike is going to need to idle for a decent amount of time to get this synchronization done, and we don't want it to overheat. Physically, what we're going to be doing is adjusting the height of the slide in each carburetor. So this is what a slide looks like. As the throttle is opened, this slides up, allowing more air and fuel to go underneath it. As you close the throttle, this goes down, blocking it off. That's as simple as it gets, kind of an on-off valve for air and fuel. There are 4 adjusters, and they're right here on these particular carburetors. There is an 8mm lock nut that needs to be undone for you to be able to actually turn these. That way they don't, get out of adjustment when the bike is running. You'll then need a small flat blade screwdriver to actually turn the adjuster itself. As you turn the adjuster, hopefully you can see what I'm doing over here. As I turn in, that is actually lowering the slide, kind of blocking off more air and fuel from going in. As I turn it out, it does the opposite. It lifts it up, it allows more air and fuel, and we'll be able to see that adjustment on our vacuum gauge here in just a little bit. I've had a few people in the past ask me the difference between a bench sync and a vacuum sync. So a bench sync is what I do at the end of a carburetor rebuild. That's where I take an 1/8 inch drill bit and I set the carburetor height to match all the way across. That's really good for a base setting. That gets the bike running. It'll probably idle decent. It'll probably run, not too bad as well, but you're missing out on a lot of drivability and performance doing that. A vacuum sync is what we're going to be going over today. That's the act of actually using the vacuum of the engine to determine exactly how much air and fuel each carburetor is pulling in and making sure that that is in sync. That is much more important than just the slides physically being open the same amount. If you think about the number 1 cylinder might have really good compression, really good, cylinder wall clearance with the rings, and on its intake stroke, it might actually pull in more air than any other cylinder. And we want to make sure that every cylinder is pulling in the exact same amount of air and fuel. We do not care physically which one of these is open more or less than the other. All we care about is that end vacuum. Each carburetor is pulling in exactly the amount of air and fuel we want, and they're all living in harmony together. So hopefully that makes sense of what's the difference between a bench sync and a full vacuum sync like we're doing today. To get the bike ready, all I'm going to do is fire it up and let it run for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. All I'm looking for here is to get to a smooth idle. I don't need it to be fully up to operating temperature. It's a full cold start. Let's see how it does. Now that the bike is warmed up, I went ahead and pulled off the fuel tank. There are a few options for what to do for fueling while you're doing this process. One is to utilize the stock tank and just kind of put it off to the side of the bike up high somewhere, run an extended fuel line down. You can run an auxiliary tank like I'm going to, Or really, if your carbs aren't that far off, you can probably get away with just running the fuel that's still in the bowls of the carburetors. Typically, you can run a bike for a minute or two at least with a fuel that's still in there. So that's up to you on what you want to do. Next step is going to be actually connecting our vacuum gauge. Where that's done is right here, the end of my screwdriver, on the intake manifold. So just before the head of the engine, there are 4 intake manifolds, and there are little screws right on the side. So these are technically JIS screws. If you're careful, you can use the Phillips. If you have a classic Japanese bike, just buy yourself some JIS, which is Japanese Industrial Standard screwdrivers. That way you're not going to strip any of these. So there's one there. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see the second one. The end of my screwdriver right there. And a matching pair on the other side. So we're going to pull those out, and then I'm going to hook up my auxiliary fuel tank, and we're ready to go. There are a few options as far as tools to use to do this. This was the kind of industry standard for a long time. This is just 4 analog vacuum gauges mounted on a piece of metal, 4 individual hoses with these like little dampener valves, and they're just kind of finicky. Once you get them hooked up, you got to like play with these valves to make sure that you're getting a reading, but if they're too open, your needles bouncing all over the place, and it's just, there's a better option now. We live in the future. So in today's video, we're going to be using the DigiSync. If you guys follow any kind of Instagram motorcycle content or Facebook Marketplace or whatever, you've probably seen some advertising for these, and I had to try one. So I got the 6-port version because I hope to one day have an air-cooled Porsche, and I want the ability to synchronize all 6 of those carburetors. In the meantime, we'll have to stick with 4-cylinder motorcycles, but this can do a twin 4-cylinder. If you happen to have whatever that crazy 6-cylinder Honda, what is it, a CBX 1000 or something? I can't remember. If you have one of those, this will do that as well. It has a lot of cool features like automatic calibration. So I'll show you when we get it hooked up to the bike, but we'll basically turn it on with the bike off. It'll calibrate to atmospheric pressure, temperature, all that kind of stuff. We'll turn the bike on. It'll automatically sense that only 4 of these are connected to a cylinder. It'll forget that these other 2 exist for now, and then we'll be able to see our readings. It's got like RPM readings, all kinds of stuff. It does also come with 5mm and 6mm adapters. For the classic Hondas, we're going to be using the 5mm adapter, as well as this little hose. We basically stick this on the little nipple and then screw it into the port that we just removed. We don't have to go crazy tight with these. Basically, you're just looking for an airtight seal. It does have a little O-ring. So we're just gonna go good and snug with this. Then we'll be able to hook up our gauge itself. The gauge is all set up. I went with, so it's cylinder 1, 2, 3, 4. I went with 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we're just not using, of course, 5 and 6. Auxiliary fuel on, so we turn this on first, and that's going to basically calibrate, like I said earlier, just to kind of atmospheric pressure, all that kind of stuff. So it says calibrating with engine off, done. Now we turn the engine on, key on, ignition on, fire up, and you can see it's immediately reading cylinder 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then 5 and 6 are 0 or near 0 because, of course, they're not connected on this bike. Another really cool feature is we get an RPM gauge. So it uses, I'm guessing, the pulses of the engine for a 4-cylinder to determine what RPM we're at. That doesn't seem like a big deal if you're like this bike and you already have a tack on here. A lot of the cafe racer bikes and stuff I build, we end up going with just a speedo, so I don't even have a tack on those bikes. So that is a really, really cool feature. So I like to set my bikes right around 1100 RPMs. It's literally exactly where we're at. And give it a little see it, so we got 56, 56, 54, 58. That's really not too far off. Let's see what happens when we adjust them a little bit. So let's go for cylinder 4. I'll bring it out. You can see now we're up to 59, 58, turning a little bit more. 57, 56, okay, that's pretty good. So after each adjustment, do a little bit of a blip to the throttle to kind of even everything out. Use our thumb screw to lower our RPMs back down. Okay, I'm looking for about 1100. That's a little low. 1050, 1080. Here we go, 1106. Okay, so we got 57, 57, 54, 56, 57. So 1, 2, and 4 are good. Number 3, we need to bump that up a little bit. So we'll go through and make that adjustment. And you're not doing huge amounts of turns. That was probably a 1/16 of a turn. Give it a little throttle. $57, $57, $55, $56. So I need a little bit more. Lower RPM a little bit. 56, 56, 55, 56. So I'm going to give it just a unnecessary, tiniest little tweak. Let everything settle out for a minute. I mean, we're going to call that just about perfect. So really we're looking for basically no more than like 2, maybe 3, I think the manual says, inches of mercury kind of difference between each cylinder. So right now we're at 57, 56, 56, 56. That's about perfect for me. You can hear how happy the bike is. It comes right back to a smooth idle. We're going to call that done and dusted. So we turn that off. Now, an important thing to do here is when you retighten your 8mm nuts, make sure that you don't twist the adjuster. You know what I mean? You got to make sure that you're just doing a light touch, just like that. It doesn't take much. And you don't want to forget this step because the vibrations of the engine can cause these to get off. So you can just feel just as it gets tight, and that's it. That's vacuum sync. We're ready to go. And just like that, she is put back together and running better than ever. I mean, I cannot stress enough how important a good carburetor sync is to get these bikes just dialed in that last 10%. It's not a life-changing difference, but it is absolutely noticeable. So if you have a classic bike of any kind, make sure to do one. Make sure to just pick up a tool. This tool, full transparency, DigiSync sent me this for free to review. I told them I'm happy to do it. I think it's a good fit for the channel, but I will not give an unbiased review. If this thing is a piece of junk, I am going to get on the internet and tell thousands of people that your product is a piece of junk. And they said, bet, we'll send you one. So I tried it out. You guys legitimately watched me use it for the very first time. I don't have a single complaint. It's very intuitive. It works exactly like it's supposed to do. It's quick. I mean, there's literally no downsides. It can also be used for a standard vacuum gauge as well. So not even just carburetor syncing, but if you're diagnosing problems with ignition timing, anything you would use a standard vacuum gauge for, of course you can use this as well. I highly recommend it. If you have any classic bike, anything with more than one carburetor, classic cars, anything like that, a vacuum sync gauge is a necessity, and this is a good one. So that's gonna be it for this video, guys. I don't really have much left to do on this bike. Truth be told, I'm thinking about selling it. I don't know, we'll have to see, because I have a few other projects and stuff I might want to do on it, a couple of products I might want to develop for it, plus I just love it. But I do have a big project coming up on the channel that will be announced next week. It's the biggest project I've ever taken on. It's already here, I already bought it, I already have some parts on the way. So if you're interested in cool old stuff, make sure to stick around. I'll see you then.